Hello and welcome to Dining with Death. This episode is on my playlist, Deadly Destinations, where we visit the sites of terrible events. Today I'm coming to you from the Cedar Lodge just outside Yosemite National Park, where Cary Stayner took his victims. I'm going to take you on a little tour of the area. We're going to talk about the crimes, and of course we're going to eat here. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. I have to start right off the bat by telling you this episode is going to be very distinctly split into two parts because, you guys, you'll see as we go along, and I'll try to keep from laughing too hard, but Jason and I had one of the worst but funniest experiences ever on this day in Yosemite, and there is no way for me to blend that in with the horrible true crime story that will follow our day in the park. The day in the park was so ridiculous, and the story that follows is so horrible that I simply can't do anything but make the line between the two more distinct than usual in this episode. Not only was our day ridiculous, towards the end, we found out some breaking news that was just too incredible to be true because of where we were and what we were doing. It was a very strange day. This is a dark travel playlist. We talk about awful events and we visit where they took place. And because this is a culinary show, we always eat in the area. But usually I try and blend the travel part with the dark story. I simply can't do that today. So we are going to start out by talking about our destination, Yosemite first, and our very interesting day there. Yosemite National Park is a protected federal park in the western Sierra Nevada mountains of Central California. It covers 1,200 square miles and is most famous for this guy right here, El Capitan, the granite cliff of all granite cliffs. There are waterfalls and streams, and the most beautiful mountains you've ever seen. Of course, this land was initially inhabited by the Native Americans. This was home to the Miwok people long before anyone else ever saw it. Spanish explorers arrived in the late 1700s, and then the region was part of Mexico until the 1848 Mexican-American War, when it was taken by the United States. In 1864, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Yosemite Grant, which forever protects the Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias. That was the first time a U.S. president wrote laws protecting an area for its natural beauty, and that act laid the groundwork for the creation of future national parks. Yosemite is home to a wide variety of animals. There are black bears here, there are coyotes, fox, bobcats, otters, mountain lions, and deer. Muleys are what we have most here in the West. There are bald eagles and peregrine falcons in the wild, and streams and rivers full of rainbow trout and other fish. If you were to ask AI to create a wonderful American nature scene, it would look very much like Yosemite. I'm going to be straight with you. If you ever had a choice to visit either Yosemite or Zion National Park for only 2 days, I'm sending you to Zion National Park, which is about 40 minutes from my house. Why? You can see more there in a shorter period of time. The trees are so tall here in Yosemite that they actually block your view. You need at least a week here to see the sights, where you can see a lot more of those in 2 days in Zion. In my opinion, Zion is also prettier. That might get me into trouble, but that's how I feel. Most of what you see in Yosemite for the average person is going to be from the road. It's simply breathtaking here, and driving through this park is heavenly. Once you get in, that is. We've been in line to get in the park for
about an hour now.
Almost an hour. So that's not on the website.
No, they don't want you to know that.
Just in case you want to come here. Now, to be fair, we specifically planned to come to Yosemite to witness something called Firefall. And that is where our day takes a very, very ridiculous turn. I don't think it takes an hour to get into the park usually, but because it was Firefall, it does. What is Firefall, you ask? Well, let me tell you what two idiots from southern Utah thought it was. These are the images of Firefall online. These are the images that made us want to come to Firefall. For 2 weeks during the month of February each year, as the sun sets, it perfectly aligns with one of the cliffs here in Yosemite and casts this absolutely incredible burst of bright orange sunlight onto the rocks in the shape of a waterfall, only it's a waterfall made of fire. Aren't these photos unbelievable?
Aren't they amazing? So when Jason and I found out he was going to be in Fresno for work during February 2023, we wanted to see this. Firefall is so popular that you have to have reservations to the park on the days that it happens. So weeks in advance, every Friday, we got up at 5 a.m. to sit online and try and grab reservations to the park on the days that it happens. We failed the first go around and the second, but then we got them. We were so excited for this Firefall. Now, by the time we had already filmed down at the Cedar Lodge for the second half of our story, got into the park and ate, it was getting late afternoon. Firefall takes place at sundown, so we only had time to drive by El Capitan and take some footage of the park driving around before we had to get to the part of the park that Firefall takes place in. You guys, I can't. Hold on.
Okay, I tried to record this narration several times and I just start laughing too hard. So Jason's going to help me explain what happened with Firefall. We've already talked about going into the park, how it took like an hour to get in, an hour to eat, 2 hours to eat, all that stuff. So we go to El Capitan, we take our photos, and it's starting to get dark, and we know that Firefall happens at sunset. Right. And so we're like, we better go, park and go to Firefall.
And all we see is lines of cars. And they just stretch and keep stretching and stretching for miles.
There's nowhere. And there's not like a parking lot.
And it's just a flood of people walking.
So I have an autoimmune disease that has really affected my health in the last few years, and I'm feeling a lot better. I'm doing really good. But Jason's like, there's no way you can walk this far. And I get so mad.
You're like, screw this. We're here. We're going to Firefall. I don't care.
We've been there all day waiting for this Firefall. And Jason's just like, you're never going to make it. He's like, we're going to get there, and then I'm going to have to turn around and come back and get you later or something.
So you're like speed walking, and we're just...
we're
motoring.
And as we're speed walking, because the sun is setting, we don't want to miss it. We're in this flood of people, and we start looking around. They're all in like thousands of dollars worth of...
like cold weather gear, like high-end stuff.
He's in vans.
They've got chairs and coolers and everything strapped
blankets,
to water.
hats, things to light a fire. And I'm in like a pair of Chucks, a light jacket, and he's in vans.
And it's like a multicolored light coat.
And like we hear like the whoosh, 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 whoosh of people walking when their thighs rub together because they have those like snowboarding pants on.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm in like a pair of like camo pants, and he's in like chinos, and we're like, what is happening here?
So we walk.
We walk for an hour and a half.
Yeah. And we finally come to an area
that kind of looks like it's starting to be maybe the area it is. Then we turn this corner and we're walking with all these other people.
And there's just banks of photographers.
When I say banks, okay, I'll show them. I have some video. So let me show you the photographers. These photographers, this was one area and there were 10 of these. Yeah. There were 10 areas with this many photographers. So we're looking up on the face of the El Capitan on the side. And we're like, this is going to be the coolest thing ever. We're expecting this giant thing. So finally we stop a guy.
Well, we asked one of the photographers because we didn't know.
We didn't know what
can you kind of tell me what I'm supposed to be
can you just point out where the big Firefall's going to be? Yeah. He goes, you see up there? At the very tippy top of that crevice, you see that perfectly Christmas tree shaped tree.
And there was one tree up there.
One tree. Yeah. We're like, and he goes, it happens in about from like there to there.
Yeah.
We're like, what?
Yeah.
What?
And then he proceeds to show us some cool pictures that he took like 5 years ago of it. And then
we're starting to realize this is not a big
like a huge waterfall
of fire. No. This thing is and the pictures that I've showed you of Firefall, they're like way blown up, way enhanced. So then
it's a trick of the light that makes it
it's cool, but so then we keep talking to him, we're just so excited to see that. And he's like, yeah, I really hope it happens.
Yeah. We're like, what? And he's like, yeah, the last couple of years it hasn't happened. and there's no guarantee that it's ever going to happen.
At this point,
Because it's atmospheric conditions that make it happen.
We are like, what? We have spent our whole weekend
Planning
for this. We sat online every morning for like a week, 5 a.m, trying to get passes.
Park entry passes because it was limited.
See this thing, and we find out it's like this big, and it's probably not going to happen.
And it's, hit and miss if it goes down.
So we sit for 3 hours
2.5
in the freezing cold. We have no chairs.
There's a little kid building a snow cave, like in between two logs in between us. That's how there was snow on the ground still.
We have no chairs.
No.
We're sitting on a fallen
gear.
log. We're freezing. Our butts are like frozen from sitting there forever. We're laughing so hard. Yeah. And I'm sure the people around us were just like, who are these two idiots?
Morons that came to watch this.
They're in like thousands of dollars worth of gear, and we're like in our t-shirts like...
Oh, like Patagonia and
Firefall.
Stuff. Cool.
So then it doesn't happen.
Well,
it started. The worst part was it started to happen a couple of times. So like the sun would kind of start to move and the clouds would come out. People would start to cheer, and then they go, oh.
Yeah, there was like three big
like woos. We're like, oh my gosh, it's gonna happen. It didn't happen.
No.
We didn't see it.
And then there's just a sea of humanity walking back to their cars for like an hour and a half.
So we got back to the car, and I was like, Firefall.
The world's greatest non-event that year, man.
So the whole way home, we were just like, Firefall. It's the worst thing we ever did.
I mean, Yosemite was beautiful. The rest of it, but,
I don't know. It was just like the longest day for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, maybe we should have done a little more research.
And I was embarrassed for us because I'm like, we're kind of outdoorsy. We hike and we camp and stuff, but we just thought...
We didn't even have water.
We didn't have a bottle of water.
Just thought we were going to pull up, check this thing out, and keep rolling.
So the theme for 2023 is Firefall.
Sorry, Yosemite. We actually love you, but...
Science better, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, that was just easier to film with Jason. I know, we're idiots. We are ridiculous. We are morons. I promise, we know. The worst part of this is that we are actually pretty outdoorsy. We camp, we shoot, we hunt, but apparently we are also idiots. This was our day in Yosemite. I've shown you around the park a little bit. We did not have a lot of time. And then Firefall was just, it was Firefall. These are a few pictures that I took. Here are the other people there that were much more prepared for what it was going to be than we were. And, we just didn't get a lot of footage. Now, normally on this playlist, we eat at the end of the show, but we're going to go ahead and eat now because we're diving into this story that's just an awful story. We ate at one of the only two places that was open, and the line was like an hour and 20 minutes long. Jason got a Reuben. It was fine, about what you'd expect at a place like this. I got a cup of chili, but I did really appreciate the fact that they had things like this, cucumbers with ranch. They had like cut up fruit, some healthier options. Those are the things that I really crave. And it was nice to see a park have options like that. The place seemed and felt understaffed, but California is still really hurting post-COVID, and because one state shouldn't have 40 million people in it, but that's a different story for a different day. All in all, it was just a day I wouldn't want to repeat. But am I glad that I experienced it? Absolutely yes. And yes, we are going to get t-shirts that say Firefall. I swear I am. As if everything that happened that day were not enough, as we drove home, we learned some very sad news. Ammon McNeely died on the day we were in the park. Ammon McNeely is a world-famous rock climber who is famous because he was the El Capitan Pirate. He holds the most speed climbing records on El Capitan, and we were right there on the day that he died. Now, that would all be very coincidental, and it is, but there's much more to the story, you guys. Jason went to school with Ammon and knew him very well. So after this incredibly weird day, we ended it with the sad news that Ammon had fallen while rock climbing in Moab and had died. Like I said, this day was just one for the books, one I don't wish to repeat anytime soon. Okay, here is our clean break into the next part of the story. We've been laughing and being stupid, and now we're going to go into the part of this episode that is not only none of those things, it's truly one of the most horrific stories I've heard to this day. This will not be a deep dive on this story. There's a lot more to it that I'm going to cover on a longer episode. Today we are covering only the events that happened at Cedar Lodge, the motel that sits at the entrance to Yosemite National Park. This story will be familiar to many of you. I feel like this story is one that really grabbed people at the beginning of the true crime era about 25 years ago. We are, of course, talking about serial killer Cary Stayner and the victims he took from this motel. Again, this is not the entire story of Cary Stayner's incredibly strange life or even all his victims. In 1997, Cary Stayner was hired as a handyman here at the Cedar Lodge Motel, which sits at the mouth of Yosemite National Park in a little town called El Portal, California. In mid-March 1999, 42-year-old Carole Sund, her 15-year-old daughter Juli Sund, and 16-year-old Argentinian foreign exchange student Silvina Pelosso were staying right here in this very motel room. Carole and Juli wanted to see the park, and because they had a foreign exchange student staying with them, they wanted her to see it as well. Silvina and Juli were close, and Silvina was going to be spending 3 months with the Sund family. Carole and her husband Jens were realtors in the Stalked area. Jens stayed home and didn't come on the trip because he had a business trip coming up that he was going to prepare for and then meet the ladies later in Arizona. Carole, Juli, and Silvina left their home in Eureka and flew into San Francisco, where Juli took part in a cheerleading competition in Stockton. Then Carole rented a car, a red 1999 Pontiac Grand Prix, and the trio drove to El Portal and checked in right here at this desk on February 14th, Valentine's Day, 1999. The following day, they visited Yosemite and took these photos. You can see they're having a great time. They're enjoying the park, they're seeing the sights, and spending time together. On the night of the 15th, the trio returned to the lodge to have dinner at the restaurant. That restaurant was closed for the season when we visited, otherwise we obviously would have eaten there. After the ladies had dinner, the girls chose some VHS tapes with movies on them to watch in the room. That was the last time they were seen alive. Now, this was a time before cell phones were widely in use. Some people had them and some people didn't. But even if Carole had had a cell phone, there wouldn't have been any service here in 1999. There's barely service here now, 24 years later. But they did have a plan in place. On the morning of February 16th, the Cedar Lodge staff cleaned this hotel room and didn't find anything out of place. The trio's things were still in the room and the keys to the car were on the desk in the room. The plan that I just mentioned was for Carole, Juli, and Silvina to meet Jens at the San Francisco airport on February 17th. The trio of ladies did not show up at the airport. Jens thought perhaps the ladies had flown on to Arizona ahead of him, where the four of them were going to go to the Grand Canyon while Jens had meetings nearby. So Jens called the hotel in Arizona, but Carole hadn't checked in. The next day, he called the rental car company and found out that Carole had never returned the red Pontiac, nor had she told the company that she wanted to extend the rental period. And that is when Jens called the police. The search began here at the Cedar Park Lodge, and park rangers were enlisted to help. At first, it was assumed that the trio got off on a hiking trail and got lost, so the park rangers were searching as well. For days and then weeks, they searched and found nothing. And this search became the biggest story in the country. We had a mother, her daughter, and their friend vanish off the face of the earth in Yosemite. The story was on the news every day. It made the cover of People magazine and many other magazines. And this is when people really started to get interested in what was happening. Again, this was, in my opinion, one of the biggest stories of the early true crime genre. I will always associate this story with that time period. They searched with helicopters, they searched on foot, they searched on skis, and for 4 weeks they found nothing. At one point, someone found Carole Sund's wallet in nearby Modesto, California, which had money and credit cards in it. And then they knew something very, very bad had happened to the ladies. The FBI spoke to the press and told the media, quote, "We feel almost certain that the women were victims of a violent crime." Jens Sund offered a $250,000 reward that he then upped to $300,000 for information leading to the lost women. Nothing. Carole's parents, Francis and Carol Carrington, went on Good Morning America to ask that America pray for their lost loved ones. Carole's other children were, of course, devastated and missing their mother and sister. Then, on March 18th, 1999, hikers came upon this scene. It was the red rental car burned and abandoned on a logging road. The hikers called the police, who descended upon the scene. The interior of the car was empty and burned out, but the trunk was not. Inside the trunk of the car were the bodies of Carole Sund and Silvina Pelosso. Knowing where the car had been dumped, investigators then focused their search on that area, and a week later, on March 25th, the body of Juli Sund was found near Lake Pedro in Tuolumne County. Her throat had been cut and her body was badly decomposed. For weeks, FBI rounded up sex offenders, drugs users, ex-convicts within a 75-mile area. The road the car was found on was a road known only to locals, so police were convinced the killer was someone who knew the area well. There were almost a dozen suspects, and some of them were arrested and hauled to jail. And then it happened again. We will cover this next murder more when we study the killer, but the body of Joey Armstrong was found decapitated on July 22, 1999. That terrible murder led them to the killer. 2 days after Joey's body was found, 37-year-old Cary Stayner was arrested and placed in custody. Like we know, Cary Stayner was the handyman here at Cedar Lodge. He knew this area like the back of his hand. As I walked these grounds here at the motel and heard my feet on the roads, I imagined I was Cary Stayner walking the grounds, pretending to be busy. Well, actually, he was stalking, hunting, watching the two beautiful young girls and Carole Sund together. I thought about the things that must have gone through his head, and I felt sick. Cary had been questioned at the beginning of the search, but nothing led police to believe he was involved, so he was scratched off the list. But people had seen him with Joey, and when she was found murdered, the police searched Cary's living quarters, which were right back here in this area. Oh, it's just really creepy to stand here as I think about all of this. In Cary's backpack, investigators found some evidence that linked him to some of these crimes, and he was told not to leave town. When he was finally arrested, he was found at a nudist colony in the area. Cary Stayner pretty quickly admitted he was the killer. When you know about Cary Stayner's unusual life, it's not surprising that he had issues. Again, we'll cover him soon and go over all of that. But what matters here is Carole, Juli, and Silvina. What they must have endured is something I don't like to think about. We will never know exactly what they went through or what this monster did to them, but we do know it was horrific. And poor Juli, separated from her mother and friend and taken off to endure more, only to die in such a gruesome manner. It is awful. You know, I cover a lot of despicable people here, but there are always a few that I just have a real hatred for. I despise Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. I despise Gary Ridgway, and I despise Cary Stayner. And I think I have finally figured out why. I know men who remind me of each and every one of these three, and I have some others as well. And I see something in these men that I know that I also see in these killers, and it makes my skin crawl. Whenever I see Cary Stayner, I might as well be looking at someone I know very well. And while I've never known this person to be violent, they have some undeniable similarities, and it really freaks me out. I am so very happy and relieved that Cary Stayner was caught, because this man, there is something reptilian about this man, and these are not his only victims. He is very, very dangerous. We're going to talk about Cary Stayner's trial, his different sentences, his different appeals on this later date. But just know that right now he sits on death row at San Quentin. He's been there since 2002, but there hasn't been an execution in California since 2006. So don't hold your breath waiting for a date to be set for him to die. For now, we're stuck with him. But fortunately for all of us, he's locked away and he's never getting out. I know this episode felt a lot different than others on this playlist. There was just no way to smoothly blend these two things together. Some people feel I never do a very good job at that, and that's okay. But again, this is a dark travel show. We talk about terrible things, and we talk about the location, and we talk about the food there. That's what this is. I hope you did enjoy our little trip through Yosemite. It was far from coverage of the park. You didn't get to see much of it, and I'm sorry that we planned so poorly and were so uneducated about this park. I'm so embarrassed for both of us, but thank you for watching anyway.
Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, Deadly Destinations. Hit the like button if you liked the video, subscribe to my channel if you want to support me, and if you really want to support me, you can join my Patreon. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.